Okay, we reached the round number, so let's start. Again, hello to everyone. And I will be your master of ceremonies for this event on climate finance for WASH, reaching those most in need. First, I want to extend a special welcome to His Excellency Dr. Negash Wagesho, who is the State Minister of Water, Irrigation and Energy from Ethiopia. Welcome, sir. I also wanted to extend a special welcome to the Minister of State for Climate Change from Pakistan, Ms. Zartaj Gul. However, she was just called into a cabinet meeting, so we will use our plan B. We will deploy our plan B, which is a pre-recorded video. We are sorry for that, but this is the price that we pay when we deal with high-level dignitaries as yourselves. I also want to thank our partners and co-conveners, including WaterAid, UNICEF, and the government of the UK, for all their support in helping us organize this event. I want to briefly explain to you the structure of the event. We have welcoming remarks from SWA's global leader and former president of Costa Rica, Her Excellency Laura Chinchilla. This will be followed by a brief framing presentation by the Chief Executive of WaterAid, our dear friend, Tim Wainwright. And I will then hand over to Ms. Kellyanne Naylor, who is the Director of Water, Sanitation and Hygiene at UNICEF, who will moderate two discussions. First, the one with the honorable ministers, and then with our respondents, being the respondents, Mr. Vel Nanendran, the Climate and Environment Director of FCDO from the UK, and then also Mr. Pa Usum Yaryu, who is the Director of Country Programming at the Green Climate Fund. I hope this is clear to all of you. I will also be happy to gather your questions. And I would like you, and let me ask you to do that before I give the floor to the first speaker. Let me remind you that we do have a chat box function available, and I really encourage you to use it so that we can then select relevant questions to inform the Q&A towards the end of this session. To ask a question for the speakers, so please use the chat window and submit your question there. Now, please allow me to present to you our dear Honorable Laura Chinchilla, who has an important message for all of us.
Distinguished ministers, panelists, and participants, I am pleased to be able to address you today. Allow me to begin by reaffirming what should be self-evident to all, namely that climate change and water are inextricably linked. We cannot address one without addressing the other. Access to water for drinking, sanitation, and hygiene is a fundamental human right and a foundational requirement for life. Yet, a lack of basic access to WASH is already having devastating impacts on the health, well-being, and socio-economic development of many of the world's most vulnerable communities. And these harsh realities are being made worse by climate change. For women, and girls especially, the combined reality of climate change and continued lack of access to WASH translates into less time at the school, less time at work, and less capacity to take their place at the table, shaping their communities and the overall development of their societies. The consequences go beyond gender inequality and jeopardize sustainable development for everyone. We have important work to do in raising awareness of the interdependence of climate and access to water, as we have not yet gained the traction we need to deliver on the ambitious commitments made both in the SDGs and the Paris Climate Agreement. Focusing on raising political will, ensuring good governance, and helping to optimize financing can serve as a model for how we bring the climate and watch agendas together for more sustainable results. Mobilizing political will is the key ingredient. We know from experience that generating greater political support for this sector improves governance and efficiency, leading to greater focus on financial flows, which are critical for success. After all, you cannot fix what you don't prioritize. When I have the honor to serve as President of Costa Rica, I work hard to reduce our carbon footprint with the aim of making my country one of the first carbon neutral countries in the world. Then, we were able to achieve the goal to produce 100% of the energy we consume from renewable sources. Delivering on an ambition at that level only works with political commitment. The mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions is key to minimizing the future negative impacts of climate change. And up until now, climate discussions and the financial flows associated with them have been overwhelmingly directed toward this goal. However, for all of us, and especially for the most vulnerable among us, the impacts on inadequate action on climate change are being felt now, and it is our obligation to put in place urgent adaptation measures for climate-resilient water, sanitation, and hygiene. Dear ministers and friends, the only way forward is together. Climate change is a complex, dynamic, and rapidly compounding problem. It is equal parts systematic and human, and those parts are interdependent. It cannot be resolved working in a fragmented way. Community resilience to the looming impacts of climate change will only be achieved if we join forces and work together. I firmly believe that resilient WASH is a fundamental part of the climate solution. Thank you.
Thanks so much to our leader for her always inspiring remarks. At SWA, we are taking the former president's call very seriously, and our mission being to eliminate inequalities in the enjoyment of the rights to water and sanitation, to ensure universal access to these services at the latest, as I like to say, by 2030. The reality of climate change is a critical dimension of addressing these inequalities. And if we look at the map of who still lacks access to safe drinking water, to sanitation, and to hygiene, and it's, as you know, billions of people around the world, we will see that there is a considerable overlap with those communities who are the most vulnerable to a variety of serious climate threats, such as prolonged droughts, such as flooding, such as sea level rise. So for us, it is clear that we cannot deliver on universal access to water and sanitation without assuring accelerated action on addressing climate change. Thanks to WaterAid, we know that less than 3% of overall climate finance goes to water-related projects. And of those funds, only 1/10 is directed towards projects aiming at ensuring basic water and sanitation services. We have also learned that almost all the top 20 recipients of climate-related development finance for water are middle-income countries. The only exception to the rule is Bangladesh, which is a least developed country. During this year, we have been discussing within our partnership how the water and sanitation and hygiene sector needs to work harder to develop climate financing proposals where the climate narrative of the proposal is strongly articulated. In other words, we need to stop talking to ourselves. At the same time, we are also coming to understand that current climate financing investment criteria might not be working optimally to address the adaptation needs of basic services, such as those of water supply, sanitation, hygiene, especially, as I was saying, in least developed countries where access, as we all know, is most limited. So therefore, we are very interested in hearing success stories of countries accessing climate financing for water, sanitation, and hygiene, as well as ideas for how we can do better, including with regard to how investment criteria get interpreted. This event is part of a series of conversations that the SWA partnership will continue, particularly at the COP26 in Glasgow in November and at our sector ministers meeting in Indonesia in May next year. Your participation today is deeply appreciated as we forge forward together to ensure that by 2030 we have delivered on our promise of universal and sustainable access to water, sanitation, and hygiene for all, always, and everywhere. Good. So it's now my great pleasure, as I was saying, to hand over to Tim for the framing presentation. And as you have seen, he has 7 minutes to make it. Tim Wainwright, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Katarina. And it is an honor to speak alongside such esteemed panelists, particularly the two ministers. Minister Wageshu, it was great to be with you a couple of years ago now at the Ethiopia Water and Energy Week. And it was so impressive to hear you speak there and the wider commitment of Ethiopia to these issues. And Minister Golo, I think, is joining by video, but I very fondly remember joining her as she declared the district of Masafagar in Pakistan, the first district to be open defecation free. And that was back in the end of 2019, shortly before we all moved into this video mode of working that we are in at the moment with COVID. So yes, I'm going to make a few comments to expand on what Katarina just said. WaterAid's been working very intensively on this, particularly over the last 18 months or so, since an event we held, many of you will have been involved in it, in March 2020, a Water and Climate Finance Summit that was held just before the lockdown occurred. Across this time, it's obvious, I think, to all of us that the world is facing a water crisis. And it is a crisis both of quality and quantity. Billions of people live in water stress for significant parts of every year. The natural environment that we rely on for water supply is at risk. And we also, all of us know as WASH professionals, hundreds of millions are without access to safe water in their own home. And with the world so focused on the COVID crisis, it underlines particularly the interdependency between access to safe water and health. And the recent mission critical study that Katarina mentioned, that WaterAid recently commissioned, highlighted that inadequate WASH is the reason for 10% of the global burden of disease, and that each year we have 2 million preventable deaths. And of course, we know many of them will be children. So it's clear there is a big problem, and therefore it's very clear that investments need to be made in this area. And this same study we commissioned highlighted and estimated that we needed around $229 billion a year invested just to hit the WASH parts of the SDG 6 goals. And climate change is putting extra pressure on these goals. We know that the delivery of WASH needs to be resilient to the future changes, current and future changes in the climate. And we also are seeing some of the existing gains in access to water and sanitation and hygiene being reversed by, for instance, floods and droughts that are disrupting access to water supply in many places of the world. And yet, not nearly as being enough is being invested. So there is, around the COP process, there is a target of £100 billion of investments. That's not yet been realized, and we have not yet worked out how to make sure that reaches the poorest. And if you look at total public and private investment in climate, The vast majority of that is being invested in mitigation. So around 95% is being invested in trying to slow down climate change. Only 5% is being invested in dealing with the climate change that is already with us. And as Katerina already mentioned, you can see that Bangladesh is the only LDC, least developed country, in the top 20 of grant recipients of that investment. Sorry, it's not grants, of that investment. And if you look at public investment, only 1% of public climate finance is focused on basic water. And yet we all know that the way that climate change affects people is principally through water. There's also issues about the quality of finance, and in particular, the lead times. Many of us are experiencing very long lead times, very high levels of complexity in accessing climate finance. Even organizations like WaterAid or UNICEF feel this. And we need the focus to be on getting this finance to those in the greatest need, not those who are the best at applying for it. Okay, so that's a shift that we need to see. Turning to the WASH sector, we in the WASH sector need to ensure that these plans we put together for action on WASH must include climate risk. Climate risk needs to be assessed, monitored, and managed, because we need to deliver in a way that is relevant to the world of today and the world we see ahead in tomorrow in terms of both current and potential climate impact. And also, and this has come through very strongly in the work we've been doing over the last year or so, it's bigger than WASH. We need solutions that go across the whole of the water spectrum. We need things that take account of nature-based solutions, water research management. We need to work with other users of water. So yes, people use water, but it's, as we all know, it's less than 10%. Agriculture, industry, etc. We need to think across the entire water system and create community resilient solutions that will work in particular for the very poorest. From WaterAid's perspective, we have been working with a whole load of people who are involved in this call, and with our president, WaterAid's president, His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales, as part of the Sustainable Markets Initiative. We've been the leader of the task force on water within that. We have developed something called the Resilient Water Accelerator, which is aiming to speed up investment, and it is aiming to be comprehensive in going across the whole of the water sector. So it is WASH, but it is wider than that. It looks at the wider sector. And of course, we are targeting the very poorest communities in the world and wanting to put them at the center of action on climate and water, delivering for millions. So we need innovation around the financing models here. We need more sophisticated financing models, and we need models that will bring the water and finance sector together to secure private investment in sustainable with sustainable financial models that meet the needs of the very poorest communities in the world, who of course do the least to cause climate change. And to support them in developing their health, ensuring their health is secure. So I think, in summary, I think what we are debating today, there's a massive need here, and there's a massive opportunity to increase the investment in water, to make sure that it is sustainable and it responds and anticipates the needs of climate change, the impact of climate change on water security. And it's faster, and it delivers for the very poorest people in the world. So I hope those are useful, and I sit here very eager to hear the comments of the ministers and the wider panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tim, for your intervention, or as always, for your enthusiasm. And if I had to quote something that you said that resonated with me in particular, it was the sentence that where you said that funding must go to those who are in greatest need and not to those who are best at applying. And you made, as it's usual when you speak, you made the case again and again and again for reaching out the most marginalized and excluded communities. Also the links with wider water issues. So thank you so much. And without further ado, it's now my great pleasure to now hand over to Kellyanne Naylor, as I told you, the Director for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene at UNICEF in New York, who will moderate a half-hour-long panel discussion that will be sharing and debating success stories, adaptation needs for drinking water, sanitation and hygiene. I'm sorry. Kelly, over to you, please.
Great, thanks so much, Katerina, and what a great way to start the day here in New York. So really, good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone, and it's such a pleasure for UNICEF to be part of this event today and contribute to this important and timely discussion. I think Tim has just really set the scene between the numbers and also highlighted kind of the stakes of what we are talking about today, and really also emphasizing the fact that we need to strengthen the ability of the WASH sector to make this case for climate action. So I'm just thrilled to be able to have this discussion today on success stories and adaptation needs for WASH, because I think we're going to start by seeing how the WASH sector is already working on climate resilience, and indeed we've come a long way. And I was just thinking back to the journey that UNICEF has been on when we started working in 2014 with Global Water Partnership to develop the sector-wide strategic framework for climate resilient development. And really the aim was to be able to better understand and articulate the impacts of climate change on WASH and really identify the priorities for adaptation, especially in least developed countries, and the opportunities also to contribute to mitigation. So today we've come now to having 80 countries that are working through this framework to be able to really bridge the climate and WASH agenda. So I think we can see this has become really something that is having a global wave of action. So I think we're thrilled to have this high-level panel today. We will be having 2 5-minute interventions from ministers from 2 countries that are global leaders on implementing climate and WASH, Pakistan and Ethiopia. And we're very lucky to be able to have 2 high-level experts who will be providing a response and giving us insights and advice that we can take forward after the session, especially now that we're all looking towards November for the COP meetings. So now moving to our first panelist intervention. And as we heard from Katerina, unfortunately our panelist has had to move to another meeting, but we are really happy to be able to have a video from the Honorable Ms. Zartaj Gul, who is the Minister of State for Climate Change in Pakistan. And we've asked her to really reflect on her experience in Pakistan, which I think many of us know has been a country that has faced an increasing frequency of extreme climate events, predominantly floods, which have had severe impacts on Pakistan's economic development, and plans to be able to provide universal access to basic services such as drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. So we've asked her to let us know what she thinks about the most serious climate change impacts on WASH in Pakistan, and to tell us about how Pakistan is working to deliver solutions. So now over to her video.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I'm thankful for all of the organizers for focusing on the important topic of climate financing for WASH and reaching those in need and giving me opportunity for sharing my thoughts from Pakistan. Let me introduce myself. I am an elected member of National Assembly from a rural district called Dera Ghazi Khan, which is very remote and prone to natural disaster and visible impacts of climate change. As I'm also a Minister of State for Climate Change, I keep an eye on such evidence. What is the visible impact of climate change and linked impacts are on sanitation and hygiene, whereas WASH is the least funded sector for climate financing. In my district, whenever flood comes, which comes more often now because of the climate change and has more intensity, all people move to higher grounds and wait for it to recede. On high grounds, they are deprived of essential and life-saving services like water and sanitation. Being a woman myself, I would say that women face extraordinary difficulties in their circumstances because of their privacy needs. So we can see the visible impacts of climate change in WASH sector, and the brunt of impacts is faced by the poor in remote areas who have limited choices to make, especially women and girls. It is therefore a priority for us that we make climate financing for WASH sector available and facilitate WASH sector partners like UNICEF to access it and help them in reaching out to those who are most vulnerable and unserved. Pakistan being one of the most climate change vulnerable countries in the world, Pakistan's economy is already under severe strain from prevailing and likely future threats of climate change. The livelihood of the poor and the unprivileged segments of society is particularly at risk from the ever increasing exposure to natural calamities such as flash floods, riverine overflows, heavy monsoon, cyclone, droughts and heat waves. As a lower riparian state situated in a semi-arid region, Pakistan also needs to remain watchful of the implications of a water stress situation. I once again thank all of the panelists, organizers and virtual viewers for making this session very useful and listening for our experience from Pakistan. I thank you all.
Great. Well, thank you so much to the minister and her team for preparing that intervention. And I think, you know, we've really heard from a firsthand experience about how being able to bridge using WASH as an opportunity to bridge these climate change impacts has also really contributed to other important development priorities, such as poverty reduction and the gender dimensions. And I think that this is really important to see the solution that WASH brings in the climate space is also one that really contributes to a lot of other social development and social sector objectives. So this is really exciting to be able to hear from one country. So now let's move to our second country. And it's such a pleasure and an honor to be able to introduce the Honorable Dr. Negash Wagishu, the State Minister of Water, Irrigation and Energy in Ethiopia. Negash, I think it's like a tradition that seeing you, whether we're in Stockholm or here now together in this virtual platform. But Minister, Ethiopia is severely impacted by different changes in climate. Droughts are becoming more frequent, intense, and geographically extended. And in this context, Ethiopia is recognized as an international example of how you've been able to bring together various stakeholders together to have a coordinated development effort that brings together WASH, management of water, land, and related resources to be able to maximize the economic benefits and social welfare of the population. And this is really, and I've seen personally that this has really been able to help Ethiopia make the case for climate financing for WASH. Can you please tell us more about what you've done and how you achieve this? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Kelly. and Katrina, and all panelists for having me on this high-level platform to share some of the Ethiopian efforts towards climate resilient wash and water source management financing. As we all well understood, when we come to Ethiopia, in terms of greenhouse gas emission, Ethiopia's contribution to the global greenhouse gas emission is almost none. However, the country being affected and being vulnerable to impact of climate, both flood and the drought of various magnitude hit the country with frequent incidences. This put millions at risk in terms of food security and other essential services like water supply and sanitation, power provision, road access, and the settlement as well. Well, there is the water supply and sanitation sector is one which being endangered as a result of impacts of climate change. This is well manifested in terms of decrease in annual volume of both surface and the groundwater sources, drying springs and wells, which are used as sources for water supply and sanitation, destruction of water supply and sanitation infrastructures because of unprecedented heavy flood became common phenomenon. Not only people, but also livestock, as many parts of Ethiopia are either agro-pastoralists or pastoralists. This pastoral community get adversely affected, lacking sufficient water for livestock as well. So it also resulted in adverse consequences, as minister from Pakistan well mentioned on girls and women, ultimately losing their productive time by traveling long distance to fetch water, and even compromising their personal dignity as well because of lack of water for sanitation purpose. Destruction of sanitation infrastructure also poses health risks in many urban areas as a result of this contamination of freshwater sources become imminent. To mitigate such adverse effects, the government of Ethiopia, along with key wash sector development partners, established the Ethiopian One Wash National Program. And this platform, both government and the development partners, focused on harmonization and alignment of wash and water source management endeavors through resource mobilization, budgeting, leading the implementation process, monitoring and evaluation, as well as reporting as a single entity. In addition to this, we also established a high-level government donor water sector working group encompassing the government sectors, where the water sector, the agriculture sector, environment, forest, and the climate sector is also part of the government sector, and donors on other side, as well as academia and civil society organizations, to deal with aligning the various water sector efforts and overall national water sector development, as well as management, with particular emphasis to climate change in water supply and sanitation, as well as water source management. So this water sector working group is a high platform which runs periodically to jointly review the water sector in Ethiopia and put strategic directions as a way forward to facilitate implementation process in line with climate change impacts. Some of the initiatives which we have undertaken during the year 2020 were upscaling the implementation of climate resilient wash through equitable and inclusive water and sanitation safety planning as part of One Wash National Program initiative. Climate resilient wash in our context is aimed at providing water supply and sanitation services both to people and livestock, which has been frequently affected by drought in terms of multi-village water supply network. so that both people as well as livestock access water. It is evident from our past efforts that both arid and semi-arid areas cannot be addressed through our conventional way of providing water supply, as it requires high capital investment, plus even the complexity in managing the water supply services to ensure sustainability is quite high. Secondly, we revised our national water source management policy and strategy to fit with emerging challenges like climate change, which was not part of our previous 20 years water sector strategic planning, as climate change didn't come on top during those days. Thirdly, we also established and come up with a 10-year water sector strategic plan, which is in fact in line with our SDG 2030. So where we are now and how we are heading in order to provide access to the most needy in the next 10 years. Fourthly, strategizing climate resilient water safety plan and put these in place to ensure sustainability in terms of water supply and sanitation schemes. And mainstreaming the National Green Legacy Initiative in relation to water source management with full political commitment of the top leadership. This is plantations throughout the nation. Every year comes out in order to conserve both soil and water, as well as maximize recharge to the underground water so that we can access these both for agriculture, power generation, or water supply and sanitation endeavors. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Minister Gashan. I just, every time I hear you speak, I learn so much about the way that Ethiopia, takes it forward each time. And I think it's just been really great to hear about how you're really making these linkages between the changes in climate, the development plan, the sustainable development drive on achieving the rights to water and sanitation, the wider work that you're doing on water resources management, and how this is really integral to the economic livelihoods. And I think when we think about, for me, when you think about resilience, it's really about how all of these pieces are coming together, and really the puzzle piece of WASH is really, helps to join together these different socioeconomic, resilience elements. So thank you so much for that. And I think now, really, when we shift to looking at unlocking climate investments, I think the example that you've told us is exactly, I think, how we need to go forward, not as silos, but really as an integrated approach. So we're going to shift now to kind of the second part of this panel to be able to move from the great work that's being done in countries to now be able to look forward to how we can address these issues. So I think, we've heard about climate financing. Tim talked to us about this, how we need this to be able to adapt water and sanitation services, but that this financing flows are currently insufficient, and they're not reaching the countries where we're seeing the greatest impacts and the most vulnerable populations, that even before changes in climate, we're lacking access to some of these most basic services. So now we're really looking forward to hear from our two respondents on how can we link together the problems that we've heard about, these really great, promising, practical experiences from countries, with the solutions that you work with to be able to together unlock climate finance for WASH. So our first speaker that we're really it's honored to have with us today is going to be Bel Gananendran from the Climate and Environment Director of the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office of the UK. And So Director, the UK is a visible champion of climate action. As we all know, you're the host of the upcoming COP26 conference happening later this year, and one of the countries that contributes the most towards the Green Climate Fund and other climate financing initiatives. So can you share with us your views on the issues that you hear being raised today around this lack of climate financing to cover adaptation needs in social sectors such as WASH, and particularly what can be done to reach the least developed countries? Thanks, and over to you.
Thanks, Kellyanne, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. And thank you for asking me along to speak. And thanks also to SWA for organising this really, really important discussion. And I'm really pleased to be able to be part of it. So thanks again. I mean, the first thing to say, I mean, what we've heard from our honourable colleagues from Pakistan and Ethiopia is how important this issue is, I think. And that's really reinforced by the 6th IPCC report, which came out 2 weeks ago now, I guess, which talked, about the fact that we are already experiencing these extreme weather and climate events, as we've heard about, but also that we're going to experience more of these. It's highly likely, I think, that we're going to, as the report said, that we're going to experience this, and also that it's unequivocal that it was caused by humans. So I think the sort of call to action is really powerful and gets louder and stronger all the time. And I just wanted to sort of reinforce that message that we're sort of already hearing, first of all. So how do we respond to that? I guess when I think about this, I think about it in two clusters. And the first is very much sort of some of the messages we've heard and that you, Kellyanne, but also Tim sort of spoke to around some of the macro challenges around climate finance. So first of all, there's not enough. So I think Tim spoke about the $100 billion goal that is written, actually it predates Paris, but is in the Paris Agreement. The OECD said we're at about 80 billion in 2018. We know that's not enough. We know we need to meet and exceed the $100 billion goal. That's been a big focus of us as the incoming presidency. We've doubled as UK, we've doubled our own climate finance. Of course, that doubling starts this year. But we've also seen commitments this year from some of the other major donors, but we know that's not enough. This is an ongoing need to increase the overall volume. So that's the first thing I think we need to do. The second thing, as again we've heard about, is the share that goes to the countries that most need it and on the issues that most need it. So that same OECD report talks about 20% of the 80 billion I think it's just under going to adaptation, of which a small proportion goes to low-income countries, as you said. And I'm really struck by the figure. It's the first time I've heard it, actually, that only 1% goes to water and sanitation. I think that's what I heard. So we need to change that, right? We need to get the balance right, and that needs to be part of a growing pot. And I think one of the points I really want to emphasize here is that we shouldn't be robbing the mitigation pot to pay the adaptation pot, and we shouldn't be robbing the flood defense pot on adaptation to pay for the wash pot on. We need to be growing the overall cake, and then within that growing the water and wash shares. And so that I think is a really important point. And then just to emphasize this point that again has come up, that when we have grown that pot and we have increased the share to adaptation, and within that the share to water and wash, we need to make sure the funding is accessible and that it's not sort of filling out lots of forms for multiple projects that each take a lot of time. And Par, I'm sure we'll want to talk about all the changes that the GCF has been making in recent years, but I just wanted to flag one thing here, which is the UK hosted Climate and Development Ministerial at the end of March. We launched with Fiji actually a task force on access to climate finance to really look at how we can think differently about climate finance, moving away from project-based funding to sort of program-based, system-wide funding that's aligned to national plans. So I think we need to really think about those access mechanisms. And there's a lot actually we can learn from the traditional development sector, I think, in some of that. So those are some of the macro challenges. Let me quickly sort of zoom in on what I think on water and sanitation and how we can sort of improve the prospects, I guess, for accessing climate finance there. And the first I think we've heard from everybody, including the former Costa Rican president, I think at the very beginning, which is I think the political profile of water and wash just needs to be much higher. within the climate context. I think it has a fairly high profile within development context, but within the sort of climate context, I think we need to raise it. I think it's the sort of the need to act is there, but the solutions aren't necessarily there. And the integration that we heard from our Ethiopian minister into the wider planning and development architecture, I think has to be there. And I think SWA, that's certainly a core part of what SWA does. But also AGWA through the water tracker is really trying to integrate water into climate planning. And I think all of those efforts to raise the profile and integrate are really important. So it's not seen as a side issue or a projectized thing that can be sort of solved on the margins. So that's the first thing. The second thing I think, which is more sort of a call to the sector itself, as well as the sort of politicians, is to make water and WASH more investable. I think of this in two parts. One is addressing some of the kind of recurring challenges, I guess, primarily around sustainability and operations and maintenance. This was a big issue when I was sort of ex-DFID country director in Tanzania, is how do you get operations and maintenance budgets flowing to the water sector? But anyway, that issue of sustainability. So how do we address some of the challenges, but also how do we kind of identify the most innovative, impactful interventions using evidence and research? You know, from our own work, we've looked at sort of the generation and use of climate data as being something that's quite good to invest in, the use of smart technologies that can improve reliability and reduce wastage. So I think finding ways to identify interventions that are kind of impactful and address some of the challenges is the second thing. Third thing is getting to scale. So again, it's how we move away from project-based interventions to programmatic system-based work that is ideally partnering very closely with government systems, but also where that's not possible, where you're looking at business models that can leverage private sector finance. So just thinking about, I think somebody talked about millions of people, and I think that's always when we talk about scale, we should be talking about millions, not thousands. And I think that's what the kind of science tells us we need to be doing. And then the last thing, again, we've heard about it, which is thinking across sectors, not just the kind of the people that use the kind of the most vulnerable people, which is really important, who use the water, but also all the other users of water and across all the other sectors that are involved. And I think all of the work all of us have been involved in has shown to us that if you just tackle this through the water lens, you only tackle a small subset of the problem. So that kind of cross-sectoral approach, but also by doing that, getting into some of these inclusion, gender, marginalized people issues that we've talked about. So I think those four parts, the kind of political profile, the how do we kind of come up with compelling investable solutions, getting to that are scalable and cut across sectors, those are the four issues. I'll stop there just to say that I think, you know, we can't do any of this ourselves. We need to work in partnership. And I think the spirit of this conversation very much reinforces all of that. I'll stop there, Kelly. I'm sorry I spoke too long, but back to you.
Oh, well, that was perfect. And thank you so much. And you even summarized your own intervention. So I mean, this is really, I think we were all taking notes because I think these have been very, very helpful. I think one of the challenges is understanding the climate sector. And I think, as Tim was saying, this has been something that we've been trying to build, that understanding between sectors, the common language. And it's great to hear that the calls come through. But I think also, yeah, helping to navigate that, and then these very specific, you know, reflections that you have about it being not just about going in the climate space, but also actually linking the whole development and climate space. I think those are some really, really important reflections on how we take this forward in an integrated approach. So thank you so much for that. And we will hope to keep you updated about our progress as we go. And so now coming to our final respondent, we have, as Katrina mentioned, we're very fortunate to have Mr. Pa Usman Jarou, the Director of Country Programming Division at the Green Climate Fund. And thank you so much for being with us today, Director Jarou. We really appreciate it. And the Green Climate Fund is, of course, you know, something that that we're all really interested in hearing and learning more about. And particularly, we've noted your announcement to move towards a 50-50 split between financing for adaptation and mitigation. And certainly for those of us in the development community and the WASH community, this is something that we really welcome. And we're wondering if you could tell us a little bit more. We've heard about the investment criteria of GCF, so we're wondering if you could tell us a little more about how that works, as well as give us your insights and advice on potential avenues for responding to the adaptation needs in social sectors, such as drinking water, sanitation, and hygiene. So thank you, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Kelly and Catherine, and thank you for the invitation. We are honored to join this distinguished panel, the two honorable ministers and a colleague from DEFCO. The Green Climate Fund, as the largest fund, is mandated to support developing countries to realize their nationally determined contribution ambitions towards low emission climate resilient pathways. We fully committed to maintaining a 50-50 balance between adaptation and mitigation financing, which is through a grant equivalent basis. And we do also maintain a minimum allocation floor of 50% of our adaptation funding for developing countries that are particularly vulnerable to the adverse effects of climate change, including the small island developing states, the LDCs, and African states, taking into account their urgent and immediate needs. The Gcf Investment Criteria provides guidance in the development, assessment, and approval of projects. We have 6 investment criteria. The first one is the impact potential, that looks at the potential of projects or programs to contribute towards the achievement of the GCF's objectives and the result areas. We do have another one, which is the paradigm shift potential, that looks at the degree to which GCF can achieve sustainable development impact beyond a one-off project or program. And this is also through the replicability of the scalability of the investment. We have sustainable development potential that looks at how the project benefits the wider community and priorities, and whether environmental and social safeguards and gender equality are an integral part of the project or program. Then you have the needs of these recipients, which looks at the vulnerability and financial needs of the country or the population, and the country ownership, which looks at the beneficiary ownership and also the capacity to implement a funded project or program with respect to the policies, the climate strategies, and the institutions. Then we have the efficiency and effectiveness, which looks at the economic and also, if appropriate, the financial soundness of the project or program, and whether the project cost effectiveness and private sector funding mobilization. Now, we all know that we have more frequent and intense weather events that have resulted in higher incidence of floods and droughts, with adverse impacts on both water and sanitation services. As such, the climate change constitutes a very clear and present danger to development and the health sector, as was alluded to by the two honorable ministers. Now, water source sustainability, reliability of infrastructure, both in terms of flooding of sewage systems, can also cause health risk, and the adaptability of both water and sanitation systems to climate change are examples of increasing important issues for the WASH sector. And what we do at the GCF is to envision a paradigm shift towards climate resilience as follows towards the WASH. That is, climate resilient applied to the full water cycle in a sustainable way, and implementing climate smart innovative technologies that would lead to health improvement, better agricultural livelihoods, reducing environmental risk, lower emissions, and more income-generating activities as such drives shift towards building more resilient. As we engage with our partners, particularly direct access entities and other institutions that are very active in the water and sanitation sector, we aim to continue contributing towards ensuring that all communities, particularly most vulnerable, that are impacted, would have a secured year-round access to water in their communities. We have invested a total of $1.5 billion US, including $634 million US as Gcf financing to the water-related projects, which are 18 in total. And these are addressing water supply and sanitation, flood control, integrated water resource management, and drought. And just to also reiterate that these are geared towards the most vulnerable. Let me give you just a few examples of the recipient countries. We have Maldives, Fiji, Senegal, Samoa, Ethiopia. We also have Pakistan, Tanzania, Laos, Comoros, Marshall Islands, Palestine, and Kiribati. So these are least developed countries. Some of them are small island developing states. And we continue to prioritize these most vulnerable communities and countries as we continue to support climate change and particularly adaptation in pursuit of our objective as a fund. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Director Daru, for your intervention. That was really, very insightful. I think we all really benefited from hearing how that fund works together, and look forward to continuing the discussion. Katerina, time is never on our side. So I'm handing back over to you, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kelly, and thank you also for the speakers for their interventions. Just to let you know that there were very interesting questions in the chat. Some of our respondents have already spoken to these issues, including related to how we work together, including beyond water and sanitation, how we grow the cake, as Val was saying, to increase the overall resources available for climate finance, and then also ensuring that those increased resources reach those who need them most. And then, of course, we have not answered all the questions, but as I said at the start, this is an ongoing discussion. We will continue the dialogue together in order to move forward towards more climate resilient and sustainable solutions. From our side, from SWA's side, we are willing and thrilled and looking forward and offering our time and people and to work together with UNFCCC, with the GFC, with everyone participating at this event today as a speaker or only listening in. We offer to work together to make the cake grow, work together to making the funding accessible, working together to increasing visibility and political prioritization of WASH within the climate space, working together to integrate WASH into climate, climate into WASH, working together on systems transformation, as mentioned yesterday at the opening event of World Water Week by our SWA's global leader, Kumi Naidoo, and also working together to deliver for the poorest and most marginalized. I know that we are going to be cut in some few seconds, so let me just thank you all for being here. Thank you all for your interventions, and thank you all for continuing this work on climate, on WASH, and on finance in the weeks, in the months, in the years to come. Thank you so much to everyone, and let's conclude. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.